Hey guys, welcome back to another RestoreMySneakers.com video. I'm your host, the Camera Guy, and in this episode we cover techniques 2 and 3 for the sauce. Now, many of you already know about the first technique, which involves putting the shoes outdoors, and that's it. It's really simple to do. Now, there are two more techniques that will give you some options as to what you can do, because not everyone is able to put their shoes outside. It might be because of the weather, or it's just not possible, for some people. So there's a couple other options that you can take to sauce and restore your. Now, the first technique that I'm going to talk about is the indoor window technique, and after that is the indoor lighting technique. They have pros and cons for both, so definitely pay attention to that information. Alright, so I already took the time to sauce the shoes ahead of time, because you already know the process. Put a medium coat of sauce on there. A couple of things I want to point out is when you're using the sauce, you want to make sure to actually wash the brush off after you're done. If you decide not to, you're going to damage the brush. So wash the brush underneath warm water for about a minute and then let it dry. So that way when the next time you use the brush, it's not stiff or frail the next time you use it. The other thing I didn't talk about last time so much was what this paper was all about. Why did you need to make these cutouts? The cutouts are for you, the cutouts are designed to prevent the traction loss on the herringbone, the traction pods. And it's also there to reduce the heat that the sunlight creates on the herringbone, because these areas here absorb a lot of heat. And it's really the heat that removes the traction. So if you don't want to have traction loss on these areas, you need to make the paper cutouts. If you decide not to, you're going to ruin your shoes. I guarantee you. Alright, so I've already covered the traction pods using my cutouts. I've also covered the carbon fiber. Very important to do. I've also saran wrapped it already, so it should be good to go. So the next thing to do is find an open window. If you're fortunate enough to have a window that's facing you that you can use, then that's great. And what you want to do is place the shoe like this. There is a downside to the window method, is that you'll have to flip the shoes around like so, ever so often when you're working on the shoes. Or you can actually still use the contraption that I talked about earlier in our last video. You can set it up, place the shoe, prop it against the window, have all the foil in place, and you should be good to go. A few pointers and some things I want to mention about the window technique is the advantages. When you're working on the shoes outside, it gets really hot. The ambient temperature climbs very quickly, depending on where you are, and so it causes the surface temperature of the shoes to be very high. When you're working indoor, the temperature is usually about 10 degrees less, maybe more, depending on how cool your house is, and that will keep the surface temperatures lower. So you'll keep from hitting that 120 degrees Fahrenheit temperature you want to avoid, thus causing sole separation. Now, some things you can do to modify your technique is you can put a fan near the window. This will help keep the temperatures even cooler. You can still go and get a temperature reading gun. You don't need to buy an expensive one. I think you can probably get away with a $20 version that's probably plus or 2 to 3 degrees off. But it's just a good way for you to kind of get a general idea of how hot the surface of the shoes are doing, or on the soles of the shoe. The other thing is that you want to make sure you still cover the sides of the shoe. Don't leave it exposed like the patent leather when it's by the window. Cover it as well as you can. And one last thing about the indoor technique is you can actually work on your shoes longer. So instead of just being able to work on your shoes about an hour to 2 hours outside, you might be able to get away with a 3-hour session. That way you can get more work done. So that's it for the window technique. The next technique that I'm going to talk about is the indoor method. Now this technique is one you can change up, you can alter, you can design and change up on your own. But here's what I have here. I have two clamp light fixtures. This is what you'll need to work on one pair of shoes. I got these for about $8 to $10 at Lowe's. You can find these at like a department store or any other hardware store. They should have them. I believe this has an 8.5-inch diameter, which is the length that goes from one end to the other end of the dish. And I use these types of bulbs. They're called Reptiglow bulbs. I know people like to use full spectrum bulbs and daylight bulbs, but the reason why you want to use a Reptiglow bulb is that it has a particular wavelength. The product reacts, or even the original Retro Bright sauce activates if you have UVA lights. UVA has a light spectrum between 315 to 400 nanometers. I know that's a lot of information for some of you, but just bear with me. So this particular light bulb has a range that fits between that 315 to 400 range. So this has UVA rays in it. Now, I haven't tested this yet, but you can probably buy a black light. A black light is specifically a UVA light. So if you want to try buying a UVA bulb, I would suggest finding a fluorescent version, and that should work really well. That's based on my understanding of how the product works and how the chemistry happens with this stuff. So either go ahead and find one of these. These cost around $10 to $20 at a local Petco or wherever. It's cheaper to get online, but sometimes you get broken bulbs when you order stuff online. Just giving you a heads up there. Like I said, but if you can find a UVA bulb, that'll be even better. A black light bulb. So I have my two fixtures here. I have my setup down here that you've seen before in the past. Nothing complicated. It has the filler socks and the aluminum foil. What you'll do then is put your shoe in place. This is how I originated the original box setup, was because I was testing the indoor method before. And so what you want to do is make sure you have foil that wraps around the shoe at all times, because you don't have much flexibility in the light source. You're pretty much stuck with these two bulbs when you're working with it. So here, I already turned on the lights on here. Just because you're working underneath a indoor light setup doesn't mean it doesn't get hot. You can actually still get temperatures of over 120 degrees depending on how close you are to the light source and how hot it is in your house. So here's a tip for you guys. The closer you put the shoe to the light source, the higher the temperature gets. That should be obvious. The farther away you put it, the lower the temperature is. Those are just really obvious things. But the closer you put the shoe, the more effective the light source will be. But if you put it farther away, it won't work as well. There are some pros and cons with using the indoor technique. One of them is that it takes much longer to get results with the indoor technique. That's one of the cons with it. Let's look at the translation with temperature. Putting the shoes outside for about 2 hours translates to about 10 to 12 hours underneath a light source. And that's based on my opinion from my experience. So 2 hours outdoors might be 10 to 12 hours underneath a light source. So that's something for you to consider. The next thing is, when you keep the shoes underneath a light source for that long, you're still gonna have a buildup of heat across the shoe, across the sole. What will happen is, with prolonged exposure to this light source, which is heat, the traction on the rest of the clear soles will go away. You'll lose traction on the rest of the soles. Meaning, when you rub your hand over the sole of the shoe, it'll be very slick. Your hand will just slide right off. So if you want that, and you don't care about it, then go right ahead and use the indoor light setup technique. But I wouldn't recommend it as much as I used to. But if it's your only option, then by all means try it out. The other thing is, always keep the traction paper on the pods. Don't ever do this without it. If you're a big fan of the whole no traction, then that's your thing. But if you don't put this paper on here, don't even expect to have any traction on here after you finish working on your shoes, after a few sessions. And this is a common problem that many people who seagull their shoes have. They leave their shoes out in the sun, and after maybe a few sessions, a couple of days in, a few days in, you can just rub your hand right through here and there's no more traction. Completely gone. And there used to be traction on your shoes. Now, some of you might still be wondering why it is that we put the Saran Wrap on here. The Saran Wrap is there to keep the sauce from drying out. And it's a good way to hold all the things on the shoe together, and it helps prevent getting anything else on the shoe. It's just a great thing to use. From what I've done, from all the testing that I've done, I haven't seen any adverse effects to using the Saran Wrap. Alright, the next big thing you need to be concerned about if you use the sauce is you're going to notice a chemical burn. Hydrogen peroxide has the ability to cause chemical burns. That's the reason why if you get the sauce on your hands somewhere, it's important you go and wash your hands afterwards. That's why you're supposed to wear gloves when you're working with the sauce. If you leave the sauce on your hand for a prolonged period of time, you're going to start noticing white burns on your skin. Now, they aren't they're not burns that attach themselves. Your skin is turning white on certain areas of your skin, like little blotches. And I've had that happen a few times. If that ever happens to you, go and wash your hands with warm water for about 15 minutes with soap and water, warm water, and the burns will go away after a couple of hours. But I'm letting you guys know that right now. You should always wear gloves when working with the shoes, and if you ever get any of the sauce on your hands, go wash your hands as quickly as you can, alright? And avoid getting it any other place, like your eyes and things like that. So if you're clumsy, you know who you are, take precautions to keep from getting yourself hurt. But as far as the chemical burns that do occur on the soles of the shoe, they go away. So the thing about the indoor technique is that you have to sauce the shoes for a prolonged period of time. And once you're done with your session, you'll take the wrap off and you'll start washing the shoes off, and you'll notice that there's burns on the shoes, especially if there's a lot of traction wear on your shoes from normal use. Those traction burns will go away on their own after a few hours, so don't worry about it. We've done this technique many times, and it doesn't do anything bad to the soles of the shoe, so you should be okay. So that does it for techniques 2 and 3. There is a more advanced technique, but we'll cover that another time. I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. Hopefully it was helpful in giving you some more information and insight. Again, you can order the sauce on our website at restoremysneakers.com/sauce. We are taking new orders again. And last but not least, if you have any questions, let us know and we'll do our best to answer them. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and be sure to stay tuned for our next episode.